Hello everyone and welcome to the Admiral's Musings. I'm Admiral Ellis, an officer of the TTO, and this is what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be reading excerpts from the writings of escapades I've had over, actually relatively recently. It's really not quite that much of a span of time, at least for you guys, between the first story that's been documented and the last one that I have planned to write. Of course, within that, there's a whole bunch of different time streams, time frames, different actual locations and times, yeah, that I've been to that you'll be following me through, even though in our length of time, because I live here, it'll only be over the span of about 2 or 3 years. I'm not entirely sure when the first and the last are dated. It's generally normally placed at or around when I start writing them. But we're going to transition over. Unfortunately, you know I'm not a very good editor. Last week was kind of a testament to just about all I can do. But we're going to have just the TTO logo on the screen for now, and if I ever get some sort of ability or someone who will grant me the ability to illustrate parts or even whole sections of these writings, then I'll be glad to put those up instead. Originally I had the concept that you'd be seeing more images and things, but I feel like I'll only do images when it's relevant, when they're needed, and the only way I'll know when they're needed, because I feel like I'm good at writing imagery, the only way I know when they're needed is if you guys let me know. So we could have half of an episode that's writing, no, I'm sorry, we could have half of an episode that's talking about the previous episode's writing, and then the following half of the episode about new writing. Originally I was going to have this based around what I wrote each week, but now I realize it would be far out of context for me to start way back there. So I'm going to look over on the first thing I've ever written, the first completed story, and I'm going to start at the beginning. Today I'll probably get through the prologue and up until a point where there might be a suspenseful bit or maybe just a conflict that is resolved. It depends how far I can go in 10 minutes, because I don't want to make these videos particularly long. Crap, that's my first now, isn't it? I've been trying to refrain from that. I'll go until I feel like it's a good time to stop. I don't want to make these videos too long, but then again, I don't want to make them not worthwhile for you to just put them in the background, not necessarily look at them, but listen while you're doing something else. I want this to be more of an audiobook kind of thing, and if you feel the need to critique, go right ahead in the comments, because I always like criticism, positive or negative, even if, well, maybe not all negative, but whatever. I'll see you in just a second. Alright, hello, mic test, everything looks good. Here we are on Welcome to the TTO. The forward page is kind of unnecessary, the chapter page is blank, so here we are at Book 0, finishing the job. And if you didn't catch it, the name of this the book is divided up into smaller books. The name of the full book is Welcome to the TTO, and this is the first section, Book 0. Finishing the job. The second unseen time war has been raging for over a year now and is finally drawing to a close. Its elusive leader has been tracked to his last hideout, an abandoned hydrogen mining rig in orbit of a gas giant. Admiral Ellis and his city ship have been dispatched to eliminate him if necessary. Asteroid belt of the Hyperion System, January 30th, 2013. 1:27 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. An Atlantean-class city ship starship called Devereaux glided between the asteroids that enveloped its prey. This lonely system was where Ball had fled, a single red dwarf star, the surface temperature of barely 3,500 Kelvin, and a single gas giant nearly as large as itself.
Between them was a ring of asteroids, all the terrestrial mass of the entire system. The blood-red sunlight glinted off the rocky surfaces that we passed, working a slow and methodical orbit of the system. I had lowered every light in the chair room to virtually nothing, and was enveloped in the inky blackness that was the view from the external cameras. The only noise was the soft echo of the radar as we looked for other engine signatures. A girl's voice permeated my concentration. "I see him. Setting a waypoint." The orange triangle identifying Ball's last hideout punctuated my holographic view. I simply thought about going there, and Devereaux responded, pitching towards the outward edge of the field. The 3.3-kilometer-wide city ship was merely an extension of myself, a 6-pebbled plateau of metal, coated with towers of all shapes and sizes. From behind a mist of pulverized rock I caught a glimpse of our target, an old, battered Goa'uld mining vessel, built to mine hydrogen from the gas giant Unadilla. It was nesting in the side of an Everest-sized asteroid, attempting in futility to hide from our sensors. "I've got a target lock," I heard someone in the control room say, and the orange waypoint changed to red. I waved it off screen. Pounding the enormous station with a hail of drones would do little more than waste ammunition. "We're going to dock," I said matter-of-factly. "This is personal." "You're not going in there yourself, are you?" the girl asked, worried. "Of course I am. I'm going to make absolutely sure that Ball is finished once and for all." That shut them up. I put the city on an intercept course and lined up a docking port. The city and the mining outpost locked doors a few minutes later. Through Devereaux's framework I felt the distant rumble of metal on metal. An alarm sounded indicating hull interconnection. The two ships were polar opposites. The 10-million-year-old city I was aboard was still a gleaming white and silver, inscribed with great windows and dotted with bright running lights. We were tacked alongside a great ugly yellow cylinder, coated with irregularly shaped black extensions, and tarnished so much by asteroid impacts and age that it looked older than my ship actually was. Even though at a mere 600 years, it was a youth in comparison. The blackness that had enveloped me for the past few hours lifted, and the room lights warmed. The holographic representation of the solar system around Devereaux faded into nothingness, and I rose from the command chair and started towards the door, preparing to traverse the maze of corridors in my own empty ship, and recounting in my mind the map of his. Being a mining ship, there was little livable space in the original plan, but things had undoubtedly changed since then. I traversed the whole of Devereaux and crossed the threshold into the Gorlau. The corridor on the other side was little more than a companionway, and crossed a room of unspeakable numbers of hydrogen tanks. These all fed down to the base of the ship, where the ports to load and offload the gas were, as well as the station's comparatively puny fusion reactor. At the far end, the top of the ship, was the equally puny bridge. I was relieved to find that the artificial gravity shifted as I neared the center, and I walked solemnly all the way to the set of doors that signified the bridge. They slid open without my input, and Ball sat, hands together, a faint smile on his face. He was completely at ease, as was I. Very slowly and deliberately, I removed a DE.P shocker and directed energy pistol from my right holster. It was the only pistol I had that wouldn't kill him outright. Ball was a slippery character, but we had nailed him this time, and I was to bring him in for questioning. He didn't try to run. "Look," I said, deadly calm, "before I take you in, I have one question. Something that you never told us." His smile broadened. With a hint of sarcasm he said, "Why not? I will give you one question before you take me in. Ha ha." The laugh in his deep Goa'uld voice shook me. It was creepy. "Why did you send those replicators at me on P4282? What would that have gained?" "I struck a deal. I was simply withholding my end. I may be a shrewd man in war, but I respect good business." He had me for a second. I wasn't quite sure what to say until I realized something a bit off with his thinking. "What if you were to make a deal with the enemy during war? Would you uphold that because it's a deal, or would you break it because they're your enemy?" He pondered this for a moment, shifting his head back and forth. I suppose it would have to depend on the deal. His disarming smile returned. For example, the one I have made right now. He shimmered. I fired. The beam of electricity leapt from the tip of my pistol and arced across the room, shooting into him and sending the hologram into ones and zeros. That power burned the empty chair, and I whipped around to the sound of an escape pod door closing. Ball was not getting away again! Book 1. A Simple Mission. The year is 2194. An unnamed colonized planet, known only as P4282, has had its Stargate inexplicably shut down. Ellis's ship, the Admiral, is en route on a repair mission. 9 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, in orbit of P4282. The yellow glow faded from the room and I relaxed in my chair. In front of me, 2 men sat at their stations. The navigation officer, Ensign Samson Intayer, turned to me. "Jump successful, sir. Telemetry indicates correct time and location." "Excellent job, Karras. We made it in one piece." The pilot, a Silurian by the name of Karras Vastile, nodded in honor. For a moment, I gave no commands. The systems on the bridge blinked in their normality. The dozen members of the primary bridge crew enjoyed the moment of silence. I sighed and began work again. "Corporal Ferdinand, raise the screen, start a scan, let's see where we have to go." "Yes, sir, working on it." Jessica Ferdinand tapped away at her station, activating the Admiral's primary, secondary, and tertiary planetary sensor arrays. 24 orbital probes spat from bays along the saucer section, fanning out as they established their orbits. Everything from biome statistics to ground-penetrating radar scans began to appear as an overlay on the primary view screen's outside view. "I'd like to see this planet firsthand," I said. "Turn us upside down." Karras nodded, and the 350-meter-long Declaration-class experimental Federation ship began to rotate on its horizontal axis. Through the view screen I couldn't see over the end of the saucer section. As we turned over, I caught sight of the planet's moon, a red-as-rust captured asteroid orbiting low. Then I saw the surface, or rather, the desert. For a moment it bewildered me why anyone would want to colonize here. A good portion of the planet's surface was inhospitable sand. Looking closer, however, and with the power of the view screen's enhancement, I saw the rivers, the oases, the sparse stands of trees. After a moment, there was an artificial blip on the screen. "The scans are detecting unusually high amounts of naquita at this location, sir. Based on its size, I can say with relative certainty that it is the Stargate." "And it's in the middle of nowhere." "It's in the desert, yes. There is a river 12 miles to the east." The personnel manager piped up from his station. "The science team's ready, Admiral. On your command, I'll have the shuttle crew prepare for transport." "Not necessary, Bronson," I replied. "I'll take them myself." I stood and turned to leave. Before I stepped into the turbo list, however, the weapons officer, Lieutenant Cherno Valebs, caught me on the way out. "We're deep in replicator territory, sir. Any suggestions?" "Keep weapons powered, tell me if anything happens, and put our stored AIs on standby." "Yes, sir." 9:45 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194. Admiral's Shuttle Bay. The silvery doors to the shuttle bay slid open. The 6-person science team followed me into the bustling space. 2 layers of every kind of small craft, from F-302s to ancient precursor vessels, lined the room. I chose the latter, and turned towards the left wall. A boxy ship, with drive pods, a short octagonal dome on top, and smooth elliptical undercarriage underneath, was one of my personal favorites. I'd found it ages ago, floating abandoned in an asteroid belt. The name was scratched off, the computers were wiped, and the reactors were trashed. Someone obviously really wanted to forget this ship. Fortunately for it, something made me grow attached, and we brought it back on board. I then spent several years restoring it for operational duty. The quarters, contained in the upper portion, are spacious and comfortable, even though they aren't exactly private, and the reactors are usually stable. The antenna array at the front of the ship could be reconfigured into a handy slip-space portal opener or a good directed energy weapon, but I rarely used either. It certainly wasn't a warship, and I didn't trust the array, or its power supply, to run slip space for any length of time. The rear hatch creaked open, the ramp descending to the bay's metal floor. I walked in and nonchalantly proceeded through the doorway into the cargo hold, the science team looking around warily at the rough appearance of the repaired hull. Crates were stacked to the ceiling, left over from a supply run 2 weeks ago. We'd never got around to unloading them. A few of the science team, probably the ones in training, were carrying totes and boxes of scientific equipment. They looked heavy, so I took pity on one of them and carried one up myself. After storing the piles of science stuff in a corner, I unlocked the next bulkhead and proceeded into the next room, unofficially dubbed the waiting room. It was lined with bench seats, cubbies, and lockers, and had a weapon-controlling tube stuck vertically through the middle. As I opened the next set of doors to the cockpit, the science team filed through and sat down. The doors behind them slid closed. I settled into my pilot's seat, roughly the same size as an average office chair, but rooted to a small area where I could move on the floor. I toyed around with some of the thruster calibrations before I reached the overhead control panel, increased the radon flow above minimal levels, and pushed the fire button on both reactors. The specifically modified dual radon fission-assisted hydrogen fusion reactor banged and rumbled to life, hissing loudly until the hydrogen fusion began its steady roar and picked up most of the power slack. I toned down the radon fission now. Radon was a precious material, and its only purpose on this ship was to produce the extra power and heat necessary to make the hydrogen fuse. The ship lifted off the deck and the 4 spindly landing legs retracted into the curved underside. I reached to my right and flicked the auto-hover toggle, then pulled the radio off the console in front of me and announced, "Battle to hell, ready to depart, over." The shuttle bay commander, Marty Wesker, responded to the call. "Registered timeship Admiral, shuttle, bat out of hell, proceed to launch row. Thank you for clearance, Marty, leaving holding bay." I began to push the throttle forwards when the co-pilot door slid open. I was prepared to answer whatever question that had spurred its opening, but instead a woman came through the door. And this was no timid ensign. She walked in like she owned the place. It was only after she settled into the co-pilot's seat and turned and gave me a dashing smile that I recognized her as Dr. Lauren Hirmera, a protege of Samantha Carter and expert electronics technician, whom I had become friendly with some 32 years ago. It had been almost a decade since I had seen her last. She was a thin woman, but not wiry, stood 5'9" tall, and always kept herself fairly young in appearance. She had bright blue eyes, and she wore a perpetually tarnished lab coat, even apparently when preparing to work in the middle of a desert. Her straight brown hair was cut short, another Carterism she picked up from 5 years of working under her. She adjusted the inertial dampeners and anti-grav to her liking, then remodulated our binding shields and gripped the yoke. "All right, here we go." I pushed the throttle up to 2% and we nudged forwards out of the Battle to Hell's custom-sized bay. Drifting forwards, we turned 90 degrees to face the rear of the ship. I engaged auto-hover for another moment, bringing us to a slow halt. Once we were lined up with the launch row's lights, Marty crackled over the radio again. "You are set to go when the doors are clear. Follow standard procedure." The huge bay doors at the stern of the ship began noiselessly sliding open. A shimmering shield took their place. The guiding lights above switched from a dull red to white. "Bat out of hell, you are clear to launch." "All right, Marty, be back in a few. We'll keep the light on for you." The twin main engines whined as we accelerated out of the Admiral and down towards the planet. An orange waypoint, the Stargate, pinged on my HUD. I turned to my impromptu co-pilot as the altimeter rapidly counted down. "Been a long time." "It has," she replied, her voice graced with the softest of Italian accents. She was emotionless at the moment, still distracted by fiddling with the glassy dials of the internal dampeners. "Something is not right," she mumbled. "What have you been up to?" "Oh, you know, science stuff. I did a couple of apprenticeships in the long night of Solace. Learned how to code a dumb AI, fluid dynamics. As I said, science stuff." "Sounds boring," I noted. "Hold tight, gotta do a retrograde burn." Having cleared the Admiral by a minimum safe distance, I turned 180 degrees and fired full engines. Lauren and I were jammed into our seats as the small ticker of our orbital speed began counting down. "You know, it kind of was," she coughed. "Wait a minute." She strained above her head for the inertial dampener's controls again, cranking up the field strength. I straightened up, the pressure relaxing. "You're overclocking them," I cautioned. "I know," she beamed, "but they'll hold." I wouldn't be so sure. "You forget how much of this ship I helped with. I know this machinery inside and out." "You forget how much we had to improvise to get the dampeners running in the first place. They're set so low because they're bound to fall apart. Nothing we couldn't clutch back together." "So you're planning on the breaking? When something breaks, I fix it. Kind of my job." "I'd rather them not break in the first place. Coming in on an orbital re-entry with no inertial dampeners is a bad way to start your day." "Oh, lighten up," she smiled. "As I said, they'll hold." "As I said, I wouldn't be so sure." I cut the engine power as we slipped lower towards the planet, our trajectory altered to bring us down on the orange dot. "Aside from the dampeners, everything seems to be running well," she noted, finally checking over the whole of her control panel. "A decade without me, and you still manage to hold everything together. How do you do it?" "Easily," I retorted. I pulled up the radio for a moment, a shipwide PA. Beginning atmospheric entry. There may be turbulence. Hold on to something." "Ooh, that's a zinger," she replied. "If only you could have—" "Don't bring that up. Don't you dare bring that up. If only you could have come up with those kinds of zingers back on Tachyon 4. I hate you. When you blanked in front of a crowd of 20,000? When you couldn't come up with a single joke? That must have been embarrassing. Go and jump out of the rear hatch. Now." She looked me dead in the eyes. "No." "Fine," I said. "Shut up." The first bumps of the atmosphere jolted our seats. Flames of re-entry licked at the windshield. New burn marks began etching themselves on the hull, markers of yet another mission. The cockpit warmed and the noise increased, overpowering the background roar of the reactors. Any conversational effort would have been futile. In the early days of human spaceflight, atmospheric re-entry was one of the most dangerous parts of a mission. Many good astronauts, when they were still called as such, were killed when the terrible heat destroyed their craft. Even as humanity moved beyond unpowered landings, until the time of reliable anti-gravitation, coming back down to Earth was difficult and tricky. Orbital elevators replaced the need to do this often, but we had no option. P-4282 had no spaceport, and, according to our records, never would. The Battle to Hell was streaking a fiery stripe across the atmosphere as we careened towards the ground. With my foot on the temperamental anti-gravity plus pedal, to very little effect, I knew at once this was going to be another tricky landing.
Alright, so there we go. That was the prologue in the first 2 chapters of Welcome to the TTO. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have anything you want me to change about it, of course it wasn't exactly how it's written, but it's close. Of course, I'm not a perfect reader, although I hope I'm going to get better while doing this. And of course, reading it aloud gives me ideas on ways to fix it, but if you have any input whatsoever and you feel like voicing it, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I'll be sure to take a look. If there's anything you need me to elaborate on, for example, you want to know more about the Battle to Hell, well, there's going to be more about it, but if you want me to do something specifically on it, I'll bring back the sci-fi universe and do an episode on it. So, anything specific, let me know. Anything not so specific, go ahead and let me know nonetheless. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and keep on staring at the stars.